Good afternoon and welcome to the Economic Standing Policy Committee for Thursday, February 8th. And we will start off, Madam City Clerk, with a roll call.
Thank you, Mayor Hagan. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Crowson.
Look at her behaving. Why is it turning off?
You're here.
Present.
Thank you, sorry. Councillor Dodick. Councillor Palladino. Councillor Parker. Vice Chair Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
Acting Mayor Middleton Hope.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Campbell.
Present.
And Mayor Hagan.
Present.
Thank you, all present.
Lethbridge acknowledges that we're gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The city of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I have a resolution from Vice Chair Schmidt-Rempel, adoption of agenda. Be it resolved that February 8th, 2024, agenda of the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee meeting be adopted as presented. City Clerk, are there any amendments?
No, Mayor Hagan, for this meeting, there are no amendments today.
All right, Vice Chair.
Who wants to speak?
Seeing as we have no amendments, I will call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. I have a resolution from Deputy Mayor Campbell. Consent agenda be resolved that the minutes of the Economic Standing Policy Committee meeting held on November 14th, 2023 be approved and the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to sign the same. And further be resolved that the status of initiatives for February 8th, 2024 be received as information. Deputy Mayor.
Unless there's anything that I'm not seeing, I'll call for the vote.
You are seeing everything. Question's been called. All in favor? All seeing. All passed. With that, we will move on to presentations, and I'd like to welcome Mr. Samuels from the Rotary Club of Lethbridge Sunrise. If you want to come up and whoever and do introductions, the mic and the chairs, both of those mics will be live. So whoever is speaking can be up at the mic, and if anybody needs to answer any questions later, we'll turn that mic live. So with that, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Higgins, Council.
Do you want to, it might be better over on this mic here if you're speaking. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Higgins and Council. Some of you guys probably have seen me here before. Haven't been for a while, but anyway, I have with me the President Coordinator of the Los Amigos Project. This is Randy Smith. He is the President from the Rotary Club of Olds, and he is the new coordinator. I'll turn it over to Randy right now. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, first of all, thank you on behalf of the Los Amigos Project and Rotary Clubs from South Central Alberta for hearing our proposal today, or our presentation, and thank you for the support that you've shown in the past. I guess we can.
You're doing it. Are you
doing it?
Oh,
okay, right on. As Carl had mentioned, and you're probably familiar with the Los Amigos Project, it started way back in 2011, and all the good things come from an idea, and Rotarians, people of action, a number of Rotarians were down in Mexico, seen a need, came back, and then through community support, they were able to put the project together. And essentially the project, since 2011, Rotarians from around the area, so actually South and Central Alberta, have been putting together decommissioned vehicles, emergency services vehicles, buses, and school buses. And and then taking them down and partnering with Rotarians in Mexico and getting these vehicles out to smaller communities where they just do not have the means to acquire these types of vehicles. They don't have the tax base that we're familiar with in Canada. And so the partnership worked great. These vehicles get to where they need to go, and they ensure that these vehicles continue in service for many, many, many years. go to the next one. Okay. Like any good project, we have to have funding to make this happen, and there are so many people around Alberta that work very hard to do this. The project is funded through donations and sponsorships from Rotary clubs from around the province, communities such as yourselves, businesses in southern and central Alberta. And again, in Rotary clubs in Mexico, they have skin in the game, and they play a major role in making sure the vehicles not only get from Canada through the U.S., but they meet us at the border and get us down to where the vehicles need to go. Is it being slow? So throughout the year, Rotarians are out there. We're continuously hitting up agencies such as yourselves for your surplus vehicles and firefighting equipment, EMT equipment, supplies, anything from stretchers that go into the ambulances, hose, turnout gear from the fire departments that times out, first aid equipment, defibrillators, oxygen, helmets, boots. Jaws of Life are a really popular thing down in Mexico. And I could make a joke about how they drive down there, so they're really important. But they just don't have these pieces of equipment that we're so familiar with in Canada. So the rescue equipment that we put on the trucks is put into immediate service and is out on the highway saving lives. So it really does make a difference. The Mexican Rotary clubs, the people out there, they continue to monitor the equipment, and it's probably my next slide here, but since the inception of the project, we have taken down 60 vehicles. And all but, I believe, 2 vehicles, yeah, we can switch, all but 2 vehicles are still in service from 2011. And I actually had I was in Mazatlan last April, and I seen this ambulance, and I could see in the outline, it said Red Deer. So I had to go and see where this thing came from, because it looked a little bit older. But this ambulance had gone down on a previous trip, and the Mazatlan Rotarians had actually found that it had been taken out of service because of a blown engine. And they actually recalled it back to Mazatlan. They put a brand new engine in it. And that ambulance is back on the streets again, saving lives and transporting people to the hospital. Before we make the almost 4,000 kilometer trip down, many of the vehicles that we're taking down are 20, 30 years old. Some of the ambulances and buses have 350, 400,000 kilometers on them. And so again, the work continues all year long, and we have to make sure that these vehicles can actually make the trip down. The last thing we want to do is have to leave something by the roadside. We've partnered with different businesses. Right now we have a partnership with Olds College up in Olds. They have a heavy equipment program, and the students are able to get experience working on some of the larger vehicles, and they try and make the vehicles ready for us to head down from Lethbridge to Mexico. Rotarians in Mexico, when we bring the vehicles down, and it really does show us how important these vehicles are to them. They receive these vehicles and they make a big deal about this. They do parades, and they do handover ceremonies, and a lot of times we say, no, don't do that. We just want to drop the vehicles off and we want to go. And they tell us, no, this is important to the communities. So these vehicles make a difference in people's lives. And we actually are seeing change in Mexico. We're seeing newer vehicles being purchased now in the larger centers. The vehicles that we bring down typically go to the small centers, but I think it is just changing attitudes and how people look at emergency services. So Los Amigos 11, that was the last trip back in April. It just seems like it was a few weeks ago. And we took down 4 vehicles we dropped them off in Mazatlan. Actually, one vehicle, a fire truck, it didn't quite make it. But we were able to park it, and then after the trip, we went back, retrieved it to Canada. We've now fixed it, and it will be going down. The vehicles went to Tepetitlan, which is a community about 7 hours southwest of Mazatlan. One of the ambulance from Pincher Creek, and they opened a new fire hall. And if you ever go to Mazatlan on holidays and you're going into Mazatlan from the airport, there's a fire hall on the left. You'll see a fire truck from Whitecourt we took down, and another ambulance from Pincher Creek is in that hall. And that hall actually does about 600 calls a year. And for a small volunteer fire department, that's huge for them. And a lot of that is motor vehicle accidents. So again, the equipment that we take down has really made a difference. And you can see here in Tepetitlan, they had quite the whole community comes out. They had, we took down a handicap van, and a fire truck went there. And yeah, and the handy vans are, it surprised me. I'm a retired fire chief, and of course I think fire equipment and apparatus are the things that everybody needs, but their social services programs, the handicap vans, the social services programs there, the people with special needs, they are actually locked in their communities. They don't have access to go out to other communities to see what else is out there. And so when we bring these types of vehicles down there, they have a huge impact on this population. And the way they said to us is that, you know, like they wouldn't be able to go to a sports event. They wouldn't be able to go and do activities in other communities without these vehicles. So it really does pull at your heartstrings when you see those vehicles go down. And today that's what we're looking for from the City of Lethbridge, is to gain access to your surplus handicap vans. And again, this is, I've talked about this, El Castillo, that's the new fire station. Really, it's a 2-room. It was an old police station. The community went in and took it over, painted it, and it's now a fire hall with a fire truck from Whitecourt and an ambulance there. And they get the young people trained up, and now they have a fire department. Los Amigos 12, this is the trip that we're coming up on. And we're scheduled to leave in September 29th. And while that is 8 months away, we actually have to have all our paperwork, all our importation documents completed and turned in by March. So we're coming down to our deadline where we have to have our vehicles lined up. It costs about $8,000 per vehicle to get the vehicles down. So we're looking with 8 vehicles. There's 4 fire trucks, hopefully 4 handicap vans that we've got. A total cost of $64,000, which it has been raised. We're actually, that part of it is, we're doing well on through the support of Rotary clubs from around Alberta, but we just now need to lock the vehicles in. And those fees include all the export fees, the vehicle insurance to get the vehicles down there. Minor repairs is what we hope to have, not major repairs, but that does happen sometime. And obviously the fuel and the hotels, and we have to have the flights to get the Rotarians back that drive down. And we're here for questions.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm looking about and I do not see any questions. Oh, there we are. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to City Manager or Designate. The funding for this would probably cost the city about $45,000, probably funded through council contingencies as past practice. What is available in council contingencies?
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. In council contingencies right now, there's the full $120,000 still remaining in for 2024.
Thank you.
I see no further questions. My goodness, I guess each time we hear the presentation each and every time, appreciate the great work that's being done, but I do not see any further questions except for Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, through you to City Manager or Designate. I appreciate that these come to City Council on when I first started on council. I think it was 2010 was the first request. It was my first term. This was the first I had ever seen or we had ever encountered. Since then, it's become a little more popular to come to council for these types of requests. Is that causing any issues? Is there anything we should be looking at in sort of developing a policy or practice around these types of requests?
Yes, thank you for the question. Through the mayor, my recommendation, having had a fair amount of experience in this world, would be we do have a city policy, but to make some amendments to the policy to ensure that processes are fair for all coming forward. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I see no further questions, so we'll open debate, and I'll read the resolution first here. It's from Councillor Carlson. Los Amigos Project, Rotary Club of Lethbridge Sunrise. Be it resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council approve the request from the Rotary Club of Lethbridge Sunrise for the donation of the below 3 decommissioned accessoride vans for their Los Amigos project in Mexico, valued at fair market value of up to $45,000, funded from council contingency, and reallocate funding to transit. Vehicle 1 is a GMC SAV cutaway vehicle. All 3, I don't think I need to read all of them, each valued at $15,000 as the final disposition of vehicles to external organizations from the City of Lethbridge. And number 2, direct administration to draft a policy regarding the disposition of city assets by the end of Q4 2024. Further be resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed session documents and discussions with regards to the disposition of surplus City of Lethbridge assets, verbal, be kept confidential pursuant to Section 23, local public body confidences, 24, advice from officials, and 25, harmful to economic and other interests of a public body of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And so to open debate, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unless there's any other questions from my colleagues, I did want to ask one question to our city manager. This resolution directs you to draft a policy. I believe I heard that the policy is already in place. It just might need some amendments. Does this still satisfy what would need to be accomplished?
Yes, so if council elects to proceed, or committee elects to proceed with this, and then if there's interest in other donations, they're suspending it until such time as that policy is in place. The latter might be my recommendation.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions from my colleagues, I just want to thank the presenters. I think Councillor Parker, Councillor Dodick, and myself were on that council in 2010 when we made the first disposition. And so we appreciate all the work that's been done and all the goodwill that's been generated, as well as the great work your organization does in our community. My resolution is to continue with that for this disposition, but I think in terms of fairness and managing our risk, a policy does need to be drafted that council can follow, because we're becoming much more popular since 2010 for these types of requests. So I'd ask for my colleagues' support.
With that, the question's been called. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Next, we have a presentation from Mr. Ulmer, asset management presentation. I'm not sure if it's yourself, Mr. Brierly, or Mr. Matthews. If there's an introduction there, I'll turn the time over. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, members of Economic SBC. Just one moment as I switch over my screen here. So thank you once again. As I see the presentations coming up, and I will, get some of the presenters to come up to the front podium as well, and I can introduce them. So today we have Chris Ulmer from Urban Systems, along with our asset management team. So we have Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Ulrich also joining up here to give the presentation. So our commitment, one of the things I want to give to the committee is our commitment to enhancing long-range financial planning includes integrating asset management tools and techniques into our city budget processes. Asset management encompasses a financial planning, maintenance, capital investment, risk analysis, and more, covering an asset's entire life cycle. By adopting a structured asset management approach, we are ensuring the optimal delivery of services to our residents, balancing sustainable funding, tax stability, and service priorities. As we approach the 2026 operating budget and capital improvement program deliberations, we'll present asset management plans and insights to council committees supporting strategic decision-making and resource allocations. I would also like to share that our Asset Management Steering Committee would like to thank Council for their support for the asset management during the 2023 to 2026 budget process to allow administration to move forward in these areas with the staffing initiatives as well. I'm very happy to have Urban Systems here today to go through this with us. They are experts in the asset management field and have delivered multiple workshops to elected officials. This includes working with the Alberta Municipal Affairs to develop the Asset Management Handbook and Toolkit for municipalities in Alberta, the Elected Officials Education Program, which includes asset management for elected officials, and facilitating the mid-city-sized cities Mayor Caucus in January over the 3 days and presented to the participants on cities as complex adaptive systems. With all of this, I will now hand it over to Mr. Allmer for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Daryl, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I acknowledge that you have a full slate, so we want to go through this as expeditiously as possible, but providing you a bit of an overview of asset management in and of itself, the tool and how we use it and how we've been working with your committee and working with municipalities across the province and really throughout Western Canada to advance this important conversation. Next slide. So I just want to take a brief moment to introduce my colleague Shane Dorchak, who is here, and we're happy to have Shane. He is a proud Lethbridgian. And as of January 15th, he is running our Urban Systems office here in Lethbridge. As of now, it is a part of the Post co-working space, but we look forward to Shane growing that over the years to come, and no pressure there. But it's really proud that we're able to be part of the community and that we're able to take an incremental step to come here and be a bit more present within the city itself. So as Daryl said, this is something that we've been engaged with as part of the asset management team here, and wanted to take the opportunity just to bring the conversation to council and make sure that this conversation that is happening with us and with the asset management team is aligning with some of the observations and efforts that you're doing yourselves. Next slide. So we did ask just a brief question just to give you a sense of what comes to mind when we think about asset management, and quite frankly, great answers. You had a lot of great insight. Managing stuff city owns, really the important part is you own a ton of assets. How are you managing them? Thinking about services in fiscally responsible fashions, maintaining, replacing infrastructure, long-term budget impacts, and the most succinct answer, service risk cost. And so that's something that we're going to talk about. You'll hear a number of times over the course of this presentation. Those are three things that are really key components of how we think about asset management. Next slide. So this is the textbook definition, at least how we defined it with municipal affairs. But really the focus here is the tendency when we think about asset management is to focus on the two terms individually. And this is much more than just simply managing assets. So the way we talk about asset management is looking at this from a systematic, organized, and integrated process. And the emphasis here is on decision making. It's not so much on the actual inventory or the condition assessment of the assets themselves. Those are all important components, but how are we making decisions? What is the process? What is the system that we have in place that is going to support and facilitate sound decision-making process? You're balancing a lot of considerations. You're making decisions on a variety of different things. You are working in a complex adaptive systems, managing the city itself. So as you think about asset management, it's really more of a strong decision-making tool through your lens and within your role. Next slide. When we talk about decisions, we're not implying that asset management is going to help you make more of the right decisions and less of the wrong decisions. We don't think about these in terms of right or wrong. What we want is to have more informed decisions, and those more informed decisions allow you to make defensible decisions. So you don't know if they're right or wrong until years have passed, but you have a sound base of information that you can use to make a sound defensible decision. It's important to think about this as from both a short-term and a long-term perspective. Things need to get fixed. We recognize this. This isn't just a long-term planning tool. We understand we can't predict when things are going to explode, when things are going to start to break, when things are going to break down within fleet. Also, we do need to reflect, and how we think about these decisions do need to balance that short-term and long-term. So the most effective way to think about this is it's not necessarily just the tool or just the plan. It really becomes a bit of an organizational culture, and it's not just someone's job to do asset management. It's how asset management permeates throughout the organization, throughout the city. That's going to support how you make these defensible decisions. Next slide. So there is confusion about when a municipality thinks they've implemented asset management. We got some software, or we created an asset management plan. We hired someone. That's always the greatest pressure on the new hire, is that you are now in charge of asset management and it's your role and your responsibility. All of these can be components, but when we think about asset management more as a process or more as a culture, none of these things individually can become asset management in and of itself. So it's this important part that we want to continue to emphasize in all of our conversations, that this is a coordinated, integrated system that needs to be in part of all of the areas of the city, as every department, as council, as administration looks to make decisions on how they prioritize, whether it's upgrades or replacements or even just allocations of budget. Next slide. So based on your responses, you all have a good grasp of what an asset is. But when we think about the assets themselves, or the asset through the lens of asset management, it's not more one service or one asset more than the other, but you can prioritize one over the other. Ultimately, the asset in and of itself is irrelevant if it's not providing a relevant service. So how we correlate the asset to the service that it's providing helps decide and define how you prioritize these different assets when it comes time to allocating resources towards them. And then when we think about the asset management system itself, this is really the collection of the processes, the procedures, the different tools that you use across the organization that ultimately support the ongoing and long-term management of all of the assets that you do own. Next slide. Municipalities essentially have been doing this in some way, shape, or form, regardless of naming the practice as asset management. There is an infrastructure report card that comes out from the Canadian Association of Civil Engineers, and it comes out periodically. It's a bit like the census, takes a bit of a snapshot. The question that it's always asking is, how are municipalities managing their assets? And increasingly, we're seeing not that well. And obviously, this varies from place to place, but we're seeing a bit of a trend where there's an increasing amount of infrastructure across Canada that is in a declining and decreasing state of its condition. So we say all of this with a recognition that the pot of money to help solve all of these challenges is not necessarily growing commensurate to the growing challenge. So this is an important part as we start to think about what asset management means relative to the funding that's available. So asset management is tied to the gas tax agreement that all the provinces sign with the federal government. So it's important as we think about when the province is renewing its gas tax agreement, what is that going to mean as a trickle down to what's happening for cities and towns across the province. This is already starting to become a mandate in Ontario, where every municipality must have asset management plans in place. It's growing in BC, where now municipalities are required to submit how they're meeting the Asset Management BC strategic guide. Manitoba and Saskatchewan are starting to think about their own mandates. And as we think about the province here, and at the end of the fiscal year, looking to renew their agreement on the gas tax, what is that going to look like? Next slide. And so we're already seeing some of this come into play. So as you all know, we've shifted from the MSI funding agreement, Municipal Sustainability Initiative, to the local government fiscal framework. So as part of that transition, some of the changes in the program and how the program works is now, if there is going to be an upgrade or replacement of an asset, part of the requirement is to report on the condition of that asset. So the province is now wanting to have a better understanding of, is this necessary? Are there other options to consider? The other piece that is different from the MSI is that you now also have to report on the status of having an asset management plan. So this is not a mandate to have an asset management plan, but the province is wanting to know where you're at. So the less you have on this, the higher the likelihood of increased competition on where the funding is going to be coming from. Next slide. So I want to just turn this over briefly to Rob's going to do a bit of an overview of the history here from asset management. And I just want to say, nobody's put me up to this. I promise you that. But we work with cities and municipalities across, like I said, Western Canada, and asset management is increasingly becoming a topic of conversation. But meeting the team here and engaging with the team here, you've got a great group that have been doing this for a really long time. And so it's rare that we see a group that has this thorough and comprehensive of an understanding of the assets across the city. So I'll let Rob talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I guess I'll do a walk down memory lane about the asset management program. So in 2006 is when the actual asset management program started with the City of Lethbridge. It was a very a new initiative to take a look at what does the city own, what condition are the assets in, how do we actually get to the point of really understanding what the asset management program would look like. And through a lot of work and a lot of information gathering, there was a group that was put together, and it started off with, at that time, it was called the Community Asset Management Program. And the goal was really to look at how do we initialize and how do we sustain an asset management program within the corporation. Much of what Mr. Ulmer talked about already was a lot of the building blocks to get to where we are today. There was a lot of work. And as you can see on the slide, getting the information, understanding what we have, what do we need to do, building on the strategies, building on the tools that can use to help us get to the next stage. This is what the asset management program was set out to deliver. So having a centralized core asset management group in the corporation allowed us to really look across all business units to see what assets do we own, build some strategies in place, look at what we can do for today and into the future, and really build on those strategies. Today, myself, I started off in the asset management program when it was initialized. I moved into the world of fleet management, but there's been others on our steering team that have gone through the asset management program. So from myself to Mr. Sanchez to Mr. Richter to now over to Mr. McTavish in the financial services group, asset management is alive and well and continues to grow. And it's a very exciting program. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Next slide. Essentially, the focus is on painting a fulsome picture of how the assets contribute to the city's desired outcomes. So as I said earlier, the asset is irrelevant if it's not providing a relevant service. So how are you thinking about the contribution that the assets provide? It helps with a big picture approach to your budgeting when you're thinking about allocating resources to the things that are achieving the outcomes that you're hoping to do. And it helps get the entire organization on the same page. Next slide. Benefits overall, looking to deliver the services that matter most. We recognize that you can't provide everything. You can't afford to provide everything to the level that everyone seems to expect these days. So you're looking to get the biggest bang for your buck. There's no comprehensive list of these are all the benefits, but we'll go through a couple here just to give you a sense of why this is important across a number of different areas. Next slide. Ultimately, alignment with what matters. At its core, asset management is about sustainable service delivery. The services only seem to be increasing in number, whether that's through community evolution, whether that's through changing expectations of the community, whether that's through downloading of services from higher levels of government. The amount you're being asked to do continues to go up, and this doesn't always come, again, commensurate with the pot of money necessary to deliver the services to the level that you'd like to. The other piece of alignment is with other plans. We see across every municipality that there's a multitude of plans that you have. You've got statutory plans, you've got non-statutory plans, you've got departmental plans. Now we're talking about asset management plans. This isn't another plan. We're not talking about let's do another plan for the sake of having another department with another plan. It's how are we aligning all of these plans. So that's really the connection that we're trying to achieve when we think about asset management and why it's important that this permeates across the organization and throughout the city, across every department. Because a plan in one department, if it's not connected through the asset management component, then it's just a plan for that department and it doesn't have any real connection or attachment to what the desired outcomes of the city are. Next slide. Back to this notion of defensible decisions. So we can't determine right or wrong in the short term, no matter what the public may say. But the asset management brings that systematic approach that lets you stand behind the why of your decision. So that defensible component, even if it's unpopular, you've put a system in place that provided you the information that you needed in order to make a decision that you can stand behind. So as an example, some of the things that you are doing here just within the city is looking at within your master plans, how are we emphasizing maintenance versus new construction? So you start to put these things into your plans. Now you have something to stand behind, make defensible decisions on why you're going to choose to allocate investment into maintenance of your existing infrastructure versus spending on new facilities or infrastructure. Next slide. And I'll ask Mitch to explore this a little bit through the funded and unfunded projects.
So this slide may look familiar to Economic SBC. It's actually a slide that was presented by Mr. Matthews back in November as part of an economic update presentation. But on the slide, it states that on page G6 of our 2022 to 31 CIP book, within section C and D, there are a number of unfunded projects within our current 10-year plan that total $259 million, and that's represented in the yellow bar on the slide you're seeing. Now, it's not uncommon to have unfunded projects as part of a 10-year plan, and that's the difference between a 10-year plan, of course, a 4-year approved capital budget. But the key piece of this particular slide is looking at the light blue, which is projects in the current CIP that need funding. What that represents is we've estimated the amount of grant dollars that we receive over that period of time based on historical grant amounts received. And even after we estimate that those grant dollars coming in, there's still $185 million worth of need there. And what that doesn't include doesn't include a number of other items on the slide, such as results of an indoor recreational opportunity feasibility study, any new gym upsizing, any new projects from master plans, any asset management needs that are identified as we go through asset management planning. Does not include the construction of a third bridge, nor any capital components as a result of the exhibition. So the reason why we bring this forward, again, of course, Economic SBC is aware that budget is a finite resource, but from an asset management lens, it highlights the importance of having good asset management policies, good asset management strategies, and of course, asset management plans will be an extremely useful decision-making tool as we move forward in the capital budget process. So, thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Mitch. Next slide. So I'm a giant nerd for a certain subset of movies that have been around for a number of years. As Mitch talked about, what we're starting to see is this growing infrastructure deficit. And the way I try to explain things to myself is that the deficit is the Empire, and it's Darth Vader, and it's all of the bad people out there. And we're all just Luke Skywalker trying to do what we can to fight against the evil Empire and that massive infrastructure and growing infrastructure deficit. And the good information, good systems, good asset management programs and policies and processes is the force. And so the more that we can bring these into play when we are making decisions, the more that we're able to chip away at that infrastructure deficit, because it is overwhelming. It can be overwhelming when, as Mitch said, budget is a finite resource. And so we can't tackle everything within one budget cycle. So how do we start to think about ways we can chip away at this? Next slide. Systematically managing risk. This is an important component. We talk about risk from a variety of different perspectives. We can think about the asset risk. What is the risk of the asset actually failing? And we can think about that very differently with the cul-de-sac road that is only serving 8 houses versus the bridge. So those are going to be two very different perspectives on risk. whereas it might just be, if you look at it on a spreadsheet, that road is failing. How do we think about risk? How do we think about strategic risk? So we can say that this road is full of potholes, but it's a low priority road. The strategic risk is everybody on it is going to be in your ear complaining about it. So it doesn't mean that there's no risk associated with that, but how do we use asset management as a process to make better, more informed decisions on the reality of that risk? And allocating the funds accordingly relative to a better understanding of that risk, again, gives you a footing to stand on those defensible decisions. Next slide. So we've touched on this a little bit. The increased benefit of asset management and stronger asset management processes puts you in a better competitive advantage as we start to think about how these are going to be tied to decisions on where funding is going to be allocated. So this is changing, like I said, across the province or within the province, but also across the country, and how the federal government and the provincial governments are starting to think about how they're going to look at their own finite pots of money in terms of allocating resources to infrastructure upgrades. Next slide. So ultimately, you're tasked with the impossible. You're being asked to make decisions in the interests of the public good. And that seems fairly straightforward, but who defines the public good? And how do we think about that through the various perspectives on the asks of you when you are making these decisions? Every decision requires evaluating the trade-off. And even if we're saying no, or we're saying not yet, or we don't have enough information yet, that's a decision that also requires having a good understanding of the trade-offs. So asset management and use of information increases the understanding of those trade-offs and helps you make some of those defensible decisions and improves the overall decision-making process. Next slide. So when we talk about risk, cost, and service, this is really what we're getting at. So the illustration of this notion of a balanced approach to good decision-making requires understanding all of these components, and it also requires understanding the trade-offs that you're willing to make within that decision itself. And the circle that goes around is this iterative notion of communications and information management. So that's what makes this an ongoing process. It's important that we understand that this isn't something that we just do off the side of the desk or through one department, or we put the plan in place and then that's it. The context in the community is constantly changing. So as you're thinking about what's changing in that context, how are we managing that change in information to ensure that we're still able to have a sound evaluation of that service, funding, and risk. Next slide. So one more indulgence of my nerd culture. So how do we think about fleet? So you can use this, Rob. So what do we want? Maybe we want all of these Star Destroyers, but what can we afford? What is our priority? What are our needs? What's changing? What are the risks? If we have nothing but Star Destroyers, we're going to be very strong, but are we going to be nimble enough to find all of these Jedi in these galaxies far, far away? Thank you for that. This really helps me present these often very dry conversations. Next slide. So the second question that we ask is, what's your role? What do you think of your role within the context of asset management? Again, great answers. Ensuring we have a plan. Funding ongoing support was a great answer. Having a plan is one thing. If you're not implementing that plan through a commitment to ongoing resource allocation, then the plan isn't worth all that much. And staying informed, staying educated, advocating to other orders of government based on your needs. Setting priorities based on risk and budget allocations, and then setting priorities based on public desires and stakeholders. So that's a big list. It's a big responsibility for you and your role. Next slide. There's many different roles within asset management. So this is no singular voice that guides asset management. Every part of the community has a role to play. So it reinforces this importance of having sound information, having a good understanding of trade-offs, because there's a variety of perspectives that are going to come in to determine what the priorities are from their point of view. So how do you make those defensible decisions? We need to engage all of these components, all of these different roles, but at the end of the day, you need to stand behind your decisions on how you want to move forward. Next slide. So you provide direction that gets implemented. That's key. That's the big part of you putting forward what are the priorities of the city. So you have asset management that gets integrated into your strategic plan, as an example. So as you start to think about your strategic priorities, you're using an asset management mindset as part of your own decisions on where your priorities lie. It's not about the plan, it's about implementing it. You need to stay informed and you need to adapt. So you can have, for example, a policy that will guide the day decisions across the organizations and the individual departments, but how are you evaluating that policy? How are you making sure that it remains relevant relative to the changing context within the city? And you're integrating this into your budget process, aligning your dollar allocations to the desired outcomes that you ultimately want to achieve. Next slide. So we see this as the typical process. Council setting the priorities through your strategic plan, having that cascade through your other statutory documents, and then through the asset management components. All of those other initiatives would all be aligned with that strategic plan. So that is a starting point. But even at the top, at our starting point, that needs to be informed through available information from the asset management perspective that helps you defend your priorities. So as you have in your current master plans, you're starting to prioritize, we're going to prioritize maintenance over new infrastructure. So those are things that start to permeate into your strategic priorities. But to stay adaptable, you also need a bit of a feedback loop. So as you put those priorities in place and they trickle through your variety of plans, what's the arrow pointing up and how are you bringing that information back to evaluate the priorities that you've established and do they remain relevant over time? Next slide. And I'll just ask Mitch again to talk through a little bit of the example of its use.
Thanks again, Chris. So on this slide, we'd like to highlight a good example of how we practice asset management within the city of Lethbridge. And one of our best examples that we could come up with was within the transportation department when looking at road quality, and ultimately how that turns into our annual overlay paving program, which our current CIP is C-8. So currently what happens, a specialized van, we contract that out, drives across the city and collects various data on the quality of our roads. It's looking at data like looking for potholes, looking for structural compromises, other defects, and various other components. It collects that data and ultimately forms a key indicator or a key metric called PQI, and a lot of you may be familiar with that. So that's on a 0 to 100 scale, 0 being bad, 100 being extremely good. So once that van is done collecting that data, the transportation department then analyzes the PQI of our roads multiple different ways. And the first thing that they do is they forecast out the PQI over a number of years using a deterioration rate of our roads. Like all assets, our roads deteriorate, using the existing program, which of course is existing budget. So once they've done that forecasting out, what they do is they compare that PQ, in this instance, that forecasted PQI with the approved service level. Again, the transportation department does have a approved PQI level. And if at any point in time that forecasted PQI goes below the approved service level, they look at and reassess, is our program meeting our needs? Do we need to extend that out and increase budget? So that's exactly what happened as part of our most recent CIP, as part of C8. The transportation department came forward, determined that the forecasted PQI was going to fall below that desired service level. And C8 was increased from the perspective of grant dollars, and the program was increased as well. So that's a particularly good example of how we're practicing asset management within the transportation department today.
Thanks, Mitch. Next slide. Ultimately, your role doesn't have a simple manual to say, yes, we are doing asset management well, no, we aren't doing it well, or are we doing it right? Really, ultimately, this is more of a focus on establishing a mindset and building that mindset across the organization and building that culture into how each department thinks about their contribution and their role to asset management across the city. Ultimately, this is sustainable service delivery. What can we afford? In some cases, what can we afford to do well? Can we afford to do all of the things that we're currently doing? Decisions go beyond individual terms, so you're making decisions today that are going to have impacts in some cases decades into the future. So that mindset and how we think about those decisions are incredibly important. Everybody has a role to play in this, as we talked about the different roles out in the community. How are you communicating and engaging with the community to get a better and more informed understanding of how service delivery relates to the taxes that are being paid? There's never a perfect starting point. We shouldn't be waiting and just until we have something done or something implemented in place to start asset management within the organization, because it never ends. This is an ongoing process across the city, across individual departments, that is continually changing because the context in the city is continually changing. And it requires a balance between the short-term and the long-term needs, recognizing that both are important, but we need to think about them differently based on the priorities that we're establishing. Next slide. So we're winding down. This is the last one, I promise. When we think about mindset and we think about, 1977, Han Solo didn't believe in the Force. He didn't even think he needed help. He didn't even think that there was another system that could improve. And the important part about dealing with your infrastructure deficit is admitting you have the infrastructure deficit. And then over time, Han Solo's mindset changed. He saw some things. He recognized the danger of that infrastructure deficit and recognized that we needed a bit of a different approach. And ultimately, that becomes how we think about asset management, not as a department, not as a process, not as an individual, but as a complete different mindset about how we operate and how we make decisions. Next slide. The mindset can show up really in all of the decision-making process that you have across the organization, but can be amplified at budget time. You're bombarded with requests from all different angles. You have to be thinking about what we can afford, what we cannot afford, and there are things that, what can we not afford to not fund? We start to think about that risk factor, that understanding of services we're trying to deliver. So how do we know the answer to this? And then that's the continual build out of your asset management system and processes. Next slide. So not to oversimplify things as a checklist and just do this checklist and now you're doing asset management, but this helps you get a sense of what we're talking about through this asset management mindset. The questions that you start to ask, and this is not a comprehensive list of all of the questions associated with talking about asset management or thinking about it through the lens of making decisions. And asking these questions may generate new questions or different conversations that you should be having amongst yourselves and with your staff. And the important part here is this, you want to continue to emphasize that all of the disciplines, all of the components of the city need to be part of this. This isn't just one team, this isn't just one department. We have to be thinking about all of these pieces. And I say this with a bit of a story to close from the town I live in Sylvan Lake. And this is years ago. The town was talking about annexation, and planning was working on the annexation, and engineering was working on the infrastructure upgrades. And the planning team was looking at expanding the expanding the annexation lands out to the east, while the engineering team was working on the infrastructure expansion out to the west. And neither talked to each other about any of this stuff. And so it's such an important piece, and where asset management can really be the glue that binds is because this can help integrate all of the conversations, because all of the conversations are geared towards achieving the desired outcomes of the city, and every department has a role to play in that. So thank you very much for the opportunity, to the asset management team here, and to Mayor and Council for the opportunity to be here today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elmer, and your team for some very interesting information. I know it's important. We were talking with our CFO of the importance of this and how this is going to be making its way across the country. We've seen it in many other areas, and so appreciate the time you've taken to prepare this information. Open up for questions. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Higgins. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation and information. My question actually is through you, Your Worship, to City Manager or Designate. I think Mr. Ulmer said that he appreciates the work that has been done in the city of Lethbridge. We talked about how it's been an ongoing process for some time. Moving forward, how would these systems or principles come into effect, I'm thinking in our CIP, our budget process, and mostly in respect to the Section D, community projects, because those come from community members, community partners. They're not often generated by our administration. So how would we embed these principles or systems into that process so that every project that's coming in front of council has the same type of scrutiny, and we're looking at apples to apples as much as you can? Is that something that we've considered?
So thank you, Councillor Carlson, for the question in regards to this. So to long story short first, yes, we are considering it. So it's part of the pieces that we're building into the next CIP cycle. So one of the main reasons why we're bringing this information forward to council or Economic SPC today is so it's not only for council and members of Economic SPC to understand, but actually for the community and those very groups that come forward, that we'll be looking at it in a different lens. And not to say that that council at that time, when you're going through that and making those decisions, that you have to balance the different needs and services. But one of the things we'll be looking at here is what is the condition of our assets, say for that would be in that section, say arenas, just to pick on one. So within that, our current complement of arenas across the corporation is X. They need X amount of maintenance. So instead of actually doing more programs, you could see a program in there to actually refurbish where you do an existing facility instead of a brand new facility. It comes into play. That comes one of the things on G6 as well as one of the main amounts in that is actually a performing arts center. Which is inside of that that piece. Council will have to make a decision at that point in time as with the available funds. What does that look like for those funds in comparison to actually some of the other pressures you'll see in asset management plans coming across? So yes, it's not just for Section C assets, which is like our transportation and components. It's not just for the E section, which are utilities components, or F being electric. It is for Section D. And I think as we see the plans coming through, keeping in mind that not only is it in our CIP project, but a lot of the maintenance work is also in our operating budget. So it affects both budget streams on this. And so when we take a look at our life cycle funds, which many of that is inside of our operating budget, we also have the programs that Mr. Stevenson has mentioned inside of our CIP, like the ongoing maintenance programs, but then we have new. So now it's really balancing that for council. We give you the tools and techniques to say that that here's what we need to manage our infrastructure deficit, and here's what but here's also for community growth and areas of community growth that council may want to consider, and just realizing that if, like the presentation saying, is that if you don't manage your assets, it just eventually you're going to have a bigger bill long term and more costly to to operate those facilities in the short term. It's a very long-winded answer, but it's not just one criteria. They did mention one being in the transportation. There could be various in different areas that will come through, and in each plan. And you'll see these plans starting to come through in 2024 and 2025 prior to understand what our pressures are. And then that'll lead into decisions for council to make in the CIP and where you want, and operating budget, where you want funding to go.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Final question I had around this was, and you talked about pressures. I'm thinking about capacity and abilities of any of our community groups. Will any of this work impact them at all, or is this mostly internal work? I'm just trying to think. Sometimes we make decisions here and say, yeah, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and then a group comes back to us and says, you've just added 2 months of work into our work plan. Is this going to put any pressure on our outside organizations?
So once again, back to Councilor Carlson in regards to the question, and thank you for that one. Primarily, asset management is internal component. So it's looking at what we have today. Now, when I say that there is pieces on the other, when other assets come along, we should also be looking at the total cost of ownership of that asset and what kind of pieces we need to put aside for life cycle and maintenance of that new building. So there will be pieces that of the tool sets and so forth in asset management that would apply to new buildings. So I won't say that there won't be something that we'd be asking community groups or coming forward saying, okay, so you understand how much money, so if you're operating this building and it's a fee for service and you want an extra extension piece on it, do you have the life cycle components inside of there, or is that a city responsibility? So we're getting the total cost of ownership in the long term. But most of the work, I would say, and I'm looking to the team here, would be probably 80% would be on our existing assets that we own, and that's where you're telling your infrastructure deficit and or where you need focused funds on.
And thank you. I get most of the assets would be the ones we own. There are many we don't that we provide funding for, and we've been caught on that. So I'm just, anyways, I'll shut up now. Thank
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for your presentation. I recall, if not maybe 6 or 7 years ago, Mr. Sanchez made a presentation to, at the time it was called AUMA. And you remember that, Mr. Sanchez? In regards, this is when this was in your portfolio and all that. And it was kind of like a system we had that was kind of, it was recognized across the country and all that. And is that something we're still doing? Are we still recognized at that level in regards to how we do it? I don't know if yourself, but maybe Mr. Sanchez can answer that.
Yes, that's a good memory. That was probably 7 years ago at Alberta Municipalities, and we do currently still use that system. It's called CityWorks. And at that, we implemented CityWorks, if memory serves, in 2014, so 10 years ago. But it was when we implemented that system, and we actually won an award because we were one of the first municipalities in Canada that implemented that work order management system that had with linear assets. And in parallel to that, there was another system that the asset management group implemented that did all the non-linear assets. So we're still using those systems, and to the point that I will say most of the departments, electric, transportation, all public operations, parks, they currently use that system for asset management.
That's good to hear that. That's good that we're still recognized at that level. It's interesting when you think about assets, you always think of buildings, you think fire trucks, police cars, but it's everything from, as my colleague was saying, the gravel that we have in our playgrounds to like the small shrubs along the pathway, like each one of those things. So that begs the question is, how often do you have to do, maybe not related to this, how often would you have to do an inventory of all that stuff? I'm not saying you go count the gravel, but count the trees, like, because each tree, as it grows, becomes more valuable and it becomes an asset. Do you guys actually have staff that have to go out there on an annual basis, or is it something we do every 2 or 3 years, or how does that work?
Yes, that's again another really good question. And short answer is that assets are being created as they are built. They are loaded into the system. And the asset management team has a group of people that are in charge of maintaining those assets. Another example is like Mr. Stevenson was mentioning on the roadside. We use some sort of system that can capture some of those new assets or maintaining the condition of the assets. Departments also have people that they do field inspections and they do condition assessment, and that goes back into the GIS and eventually will make its way into the asset management systems. And even probably 4 years ago, Mr. Richter is here on his time with the asset management as the asset manager for the city. They implemented a system on the GIS where all the fields are present there. So they are, I will say there is a cycle where the departments, they go and they update the condition of those, and that's what is feeding the systems or the asset management information that we have, and will be used in the next few years to document the decisions that Daryl was mentioning.
And thank you, appreciate that. And my last question, just kind of came up right now, is how do you insure, can you insure all these assets, or some things uninsurable? Or
To Councillor Parker, so our assets are part of our overall liability and, insurance coverage, I should say, within the organization. Now, when you say every asset, obviously not every asset would be part of that. We have a large liability, large general insurance policy that looks after our asset side. So we do send information every single year on our asset listings that we provide. And so what Mr. Sanchez was referring to also on our tangible capital asset side, we set up and finance all the assets that are constructed. That information goes, those totals go every year to our insurance provider. Based on that, they give us an umbrella insurance for the bulk of those assets.
good, that's just more general interest. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
All right, I see no further questions in the queue, so thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation and the questions that came from it. I have a resolution here from Councillor Croson, asset management presentation. Say that 10 times fast. Be resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee received the asset management presentation as information, and further be resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed session discussions and documents with regards to the asset management presentation remain confidential pursuant to Section 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. If there's no further questions, open up debate. Councillor Croson.
Thank you, Mayor Higgin. Thank you very much for the presentation. If I think back to our last audited report, we have well over $1 billion in assets in the city of Lethbridge. I mean, it's a huge amount of items that we have, and it is incredibly vital that we not only take care of it, but that we manage it going forward in a very thoughtful manner. We are always being requested by the public, build this, refix this, what priorities are there. And doing it going forward in a thoughtful manner will be incredibly important. So I'm very glad that we had this presentation and that we can use this information as we develop plans in the future. So I know this was for information, so I'm hoping my colleagues feel more informed and will vote for this.
With that, the question has been called. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Next, we have a presentation. I take it Mr. Sanchez, Director of Infrastructure Services, regarding water and wastewater and the CIP amendment. And that would be, you'll got this one. All right. Thank you, Dave.
Today.
Great to see you here. Could you please introduce yourself?
Doug Kaup, General Manager, Water Wastewater, City of Lethbridge, 33 years.
Thank you, Mr. Kaup. You thought
Actually,
it was 40.
more. No. Councilor Parker thinks he's been here 40 years, and he can't remember my first day. So he's live got seniority.
Mr. Kaup, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're here today just to add a couple projects to the CIP to advance our strategy to address the capacity at the treatment plants. Go ahead, slide. So I won't walk you through this one. You've seen it. I think this is the 6th time. I won't have to explain it to you. But it's just to provide context that the current state of both our water treatment and wastewater treatment capacity. Next slide. And so next. So the first project is E26. This is at the wastewater treatment plant. Process and electrical upgrades, detailed design. It includes the engineering design work for what we previously referred to as Phase 1. The project's needed to increase the capacity of the treatment plant from 39 million liters a day to 45 million liters a day. We'll also include preliminary design for the Phase 2 projects that we have identified on the horizon. So the total engineering design effort for the wastewater treatment plant is $4.2 million. We'll be using the FGTF grant for 3.37, and $830,000 will come from wastewater capital. Next slide. Project number 2, E27, is at the water treatment plant, the plant expansion detailed design. This will again include a detailed design for the expansion of the plant from 150 million liters a day to 180 million liters a day, and also include the preliminary engineering for the Phase 2, which would see the expansion to 250 million liters a day. It's important for us to do these in tandem so that to avoid us getting in our own way. So when we plan for the first phase, that we don't design or construct things that will add expense to the next phase. And, that we don't have to, we don't paint ourselves in a corner or, create something that has to be freshly removed. So this project is 2.8 million. It's roughly 1.6 million in grants and 1.2 million in water capital. Next slide. So these two projects funded from existing cash reserves, capital reserves, as well as grant money. Thus, there's no impact on rates to advance these projects. The importance of these projects is to move forward to advance the expansion projects, to move forward with the work that we know is needed. This gives us an opportunity to move forward with the projects while we continue to fine-tune and seek out funding for the construction. And if we wait until we have the tens of millions of dollars to do the work before we initiate the design, we will have an 18 to 30-month delay while we do the design work. So you won't get the material in the ground. You won't get the construction started. So this allows us to move forward this year and next in getting the design work done and creating what we often refer to as shelf-ready projects or tender-ready efforts. So once we have the financial plan firmed up and approved, then we will be able to more swiftly move forward with the actual projects rather than waiting till council sees where all the dollars are coming from and we kick it off sometime maybe even as late as next year. So this gives us an opportunity to get the smart people doing the drawings and the specifications and getting those tender packages sorted out before in advance of our financial plans being firmed up. It will also provide us with better cost estimates for when we move forward with those plans, because we'll have fresh details on exactly what we plan to build. So with that, next slide, if there's any questions or discussion. be happy to answer them.
Mr. Culp, thank you very much for your presentation. Great to see you again after 40 years. I mean, 32 years. Thanks so much. I do have questions in the queue. We'll start off with Acting Mayor Middleton Hope.
Good. Thanks very much, Doug, for the clarification. I think it really helped to talk in terms of providing an update on the shovel readiness of some of these projects. One thing that I'd just like to clarify is, has this particular project on water and wastewater been reprioritized in the CIP? So is it now the number one priority in terms of getting it ready for potential funding down the road?
Your Worship, to Acting Mayor Middleton Hope, the priorities in the CIP are established by you and not me.
Yeah, got it.
Departmentally, this is our most important work.
That's what I'm interested in. Thank you.
All right. Next in line, we have Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Cope. This is merely for design, but as you mentioned, it'll give us better certainty on the total cost of these projects that are necessary going forward. What is the timeline for when those projects will, once the design and the funding's in place, when will they need to be begun and completed to ensure that our community has capacity? Yesterday?
Yeah, probably sooner than they'll be delivered. The first time I brought this to your attention was probably 9 or 10 months ago, and so that time has passed, and so there is regardless of when they're needed, the next step is this design work, and it's going to take us well into next year before we're in a position to tender the work. One of my hopes is that the world of supply chain and inflation may be a lot more certain a year from now or a year and a half from 2 years from now than where we are today. But the need, especially at the wastewater plant, is quite imminent.
And if you can help me, Mr. Kaup, what is the shelf life of design such as this? If we design it, I think you said 18 to 30 months of design work, but if we design it and then we cannot cobble together or find the funding or absorb it through utility rates, does this become throwaway money and we have to do detailed design again?
So to take the shelf-ready analysis to the point that it's on the shelf for some time, the details, the actual design work will last some time. Will last for 5 or 6 years. Unless some new technology totally changes our approach, the details, the actual, how big the tank is and how much steel is under a certain size motor and all that sort of stuff will last for some time. The cost estimates would have to be refreshed, but the lion's share of the work will not expire in short order.
Okay, thank you. It gives me some comfort. Final question, if I can, Mr. Mayor, to City Manager or Designate. This is federal gas tax dollars, about $5 million, or I think it's exactly $5 million. It is $5 million of that. Is this being reallocated from other projects, or is this new allocations from existing pots?
To Councillor Carlson, this is actually a reallocation of funding. So one of the good news stories here we've gone through over the last number of months, between Mr. Sanchez's team and our team in corporate finance. They've taken a look at projects, old CIP projects that were completed, and out of the storm sewer rehab projects specifically, there was an additional $5 million in there that we were able to reallocate to this. So what this means is that we're not going for borrowing for that component or having to go to rate payers for it. It's already funds that were within it that we're able to reallocate towards this. So this is actually a really good news stories for us internally.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And we still have to get approval to spend these dollars on this project, because we'd probably gotten approval to spend them on stormwater management or whatever it was, and now we have to redo that approval, is that correct?
So typically when it comes to federal gas tax dollars or MSI dollars, you have to put in approval processes for it. I'm looking at Mr. Sanchez. I believe we've already done that piece. I'll let him speak to that as well.
That's correct. These projects, they need to go through the approval criteria, and they need to meet certain guidelines or criteria in order to be eligible. And that's what we have already started the pre-approval process. So we have, as soon as we get final say from council, we can have that pre-approval in place and then go ahead with the next step. So that's already ongoing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Kaup, for the update on this. When I look at the project sheets specifically, it talks about meeting future capacity requirements over the next 5 years and beyond. And this sort of dovetails into what Councillor Carlson had said when we're looking at these projects getting done sometime in the next 5 years. But what does "and beyond" mean? So will this redesign last us, once we get it done, for 10 years, 15, 20? How far is "and beyond"?
Yeah, so Mayor, to Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, that the flowery language is intended to identify that the preliminary work on the Phase 2 will provide guidance for such a time that the detailed design for that future work is required. And so the primary purpose at this stage of the game, as I had identified, is to be sure that we don't create conflicts for ourselves. But that work on the preliminary work on the Phase 2 will become in the future the basis for the detailed design in 5-10 years time or when needed.
Okay, so we're not looking for Phase 2 then until 5 or 10 years out?
Well, it's a matter of funding.
Okay.
and need at that time. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. I see no further questions, or thank you very much again for your presentation. I have a resolution here from Councillor Carlson, Water and Wastewater CIP Amendment. Be it resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council amend the 2022 to 2031 Capital Improvement Program CIP as follows, and as detailed in the proposed amendment attachments 2 and 3, and new proposed E26 wastewater treatment plant process and electrical upgrades, detailed design, and the new proposed E27 water treatment plant expansion, detailed design. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we've heard that these designs are necessary to become shovel-ready, to be able to meet the future needs for our community. The good news story here is the bulk of this funding was found through savings in other projects. I hope that Council will support, or Economic Committee will support this going to Council so that we can be shovel-ready for these projects when funding becomes available. If there's no further debate from my colleagues, I will just call for the vote.
Question has been called. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Next presentation, 5.4, Mr. Matthews, CFO and Treasurer, regarding development-based incentives update. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, members of Economic SPC. And I will just get to my speaking notes. There we go. So as members of Economic SPC can remember, This resolution was brought forward back in October 3rd. The council directed administration to draft a report for the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee at the end of Q3 in 2024 for a program with a comprehensive, fair, consistent, and broad approach for all incentives and new development or business, as well as revitalization and redevelopment or expansion of existing development of businesses within the city. And we, at that time, also was requested that along the jury, at H Economic, we would do a verbal update of where we're at. In this regard, currently, Finance Corporate Performance is leading this development-based incentives program to bring this back later this year. And of course, this report, just give you some context of what we're looking at here, is a tailored roadmap for the development and implementation of the incentive program, as I mentioned. So it's currently a lot of the incentives that we have or council has are for new development coming into the city, not necessarily for also for businesses that want to actually redevelop and so forth. So there's some other pieces that we brought in. So far what we have is a project team has been developed and includes staff from across the corporation, including from assessment, taxation, corporate finance, opportunity Lethbridge, legal services, and infrastructure services to work on this. Work to date has identified a number of existing policies for review. So this includes the Urban Core Improvement Program grant, the Targeted Redevelopment Incentive Program, the Industrial Municipal Tax Incentive Program as some of those ones. The team has also identified that, what is out of scope. So out of scope of the new and existing business and so forth is actually the Housing Accelerator Fund, the Nonprofit Affordable Housing Tax Grant, and the Housing Capital Grant Program. And the reason why those are out of scope is because we're already coming forward on different resolutions to bring those to council. One thing I will highlight here is that the project has been on hold over the last number of weeks due to resource constraints from the operational timelines. Some of those things are our 2024 assessment, our year-end processes, as well as other corporation initiatives that have been going on for the Lethbridge and District Exhibition MOU and the Affordable Housing Tax Grant. However, further work is going to be starting here up in late March of this year as well on this to meet the deadlines. Next steps, just to give you a little bit of an idea of next steps that we're going to be doing. So starting in March, the team will conduct further research and analysis, which include market analysis. So conduct a thorough analysis of the current economic environment, identifying gaps and opportunities for that development. Doing benchmarking as well, so studying existing incentive programs in other municipalities to identify best practices and lessons learned. Needs assessment, so engaging with local business and stakeholders to understand their needs and challenges in this. And based on the research in the late spring and early summer, the team will begin working on the program design. This will consider incentive structures, so designing a broad and flexible incentive structure that can cater to various types of business and developments. Eligibility criteria, defining clear and fair criteria for eligibility to ensure that the program is accessible and beneficial to a wide range of businesses. And application and approval processes, develop a streamlined and transparent application approval process, once again, to ensure fairness and consistency. The draft report will also include various other considerations for Economic and Finance SPC committee members to consider for the program. This includes some implementation considerations around resource allocation, program guidelines, and risk management, and community stakeholder engagement as well. So communication plan to create a plan to effectively communicate to the program to potential applicants, stakeholders, and the broader community, and to partnership development to explore partnerships with Build, Lethbridge Construction Association, EDL, Chamber of Commerce, and Lethbridge County, and other entities to leverage additional support and resources. So just giving a bit of a background, at this stage, we're at the very preliminary components of going through this. And as I mentioned, we've been a little bit on hold with since October with some of the other pieces, but this work will pick up here in March. And with that, I will turn it over for questions.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. I appreciate the update. I'm just wondering if this could be, I'm assuming you had speaking notes, if those could be submitted as a briefing note to council, so I didn't have to quickly write everything down or keep reviewing the...
So I probably went through a little fast there. So, yes, actually, it's in a briefing note fashion. I can submit that to the city clerks and can pass it along to members of Economic
Excellent.
SPC.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, I see no further questions, and so I'll turn it over to the mover, Councillor Parker, to open debate, development-based incentives update. Be it resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee receive the verbal update as information. Question has been.
Sorry, I had to take a important call here.
We should have an update.
Should I ponder this?
Should I?
Is this just referring to the one that we got right here? Is there
Yes.
nothing else that's been added?
No.
Okay, I called the question.
Question's been called. All in favor?
I didn't say that.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And now moved by Councillor Dodick, targeted redevelopment incentive policy, municipal incentive 413 5th Street South. It is a submission. I'm sure we've had the opportunity to look over that. Be it resolved, the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council approve the targeted redevelopment incentive program application for 413 5th Street South for a 6-year incentive period in alignment with the targeted redevelopment incentive policy. That's CC 53. Councillor Dodick.
Yeah, I just have a question before I debate it. And the
Open to
question is,
questions,
I just want to, is this the old Greyhound bus station?
Jason, yes, Mr. Elliott said yes.
Well, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so, any questions?
I see no questions.
Okay, long story short, what we're doing is recommending council that the increased assessment value is not subject to municipal taxes for a period of 6 years. So in other words, it'll be taxed at whatever the current assessment is, and any increase in assessment for 6 years will not be taxed, but thereafter it will be taxed. Any questions?
And thank you for, I do want to, I get many questions on this, that, oh, so you're canceling tax for 6 years. That is not the case.
No,
They're still
the
continuing
tax-
with current.
That's correct. The
taxation.
current assessment taxes will be paid. This is just, as it's indicated, targeted redevelopment incentive policy compliance, which means that the projection is that the increase in value would have about $14,500 a year annual tax if it were taxed at the full amount. So this is for 6 years, and that's where the number 87,000 comes from. So what you're doing is incentivizing development of what is basically a sterile piece of property right now in the hopes that you'll get something better shortly, and after 6 years, tax it till the cows come home.
And then, and I do, to add to that, I know one that comes to mind in particular is, I think is it 608 Health is the one that always comes to mind there. That is coming up here probably shortly, and so there was that incentive to put a beautiful building in the downtown, that they didn't stop paying taxes, but now when that gives them the opportunity to do more with the downtown, is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. I mean, if you don't do it and they choose not to develop it, you still have the sterile building, you have the same taxes, nothing changes for the next 6 years. But after that, hopefully you have a nice development there and increased taxes with the agricultural flavor that I referred to earlier.
All right. With that, can I take that as your opening and closing?
That is, I call the question.
All right, question's been called. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. I have another submission regarding community wellbeing and safety strategy, family and community support services allocation request from Deputy Mayor Campbell. Be it resolved that the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council approve the following recommendation of the CWSS Advisory Committee regarding funding from the Provincial Family and Community Support Services, that's the FCSS funding portfolio. Approve and allocate up to $15,000 of currently unallocated FCSS funding to an existing agreement with Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Lethbridge and District for a youth mentorship program that was previously approved under historical CWSS procurements in alignment with FCSS funding eligibility criteria. And further, the mayor and city clerk be authorized authorized to sign the appropriate amended funding agreement, and such agreement shall be subject to continuous administrative review and optional renewal at the discretion of the City of Lethbridge, pending available funding from the Government of Alberta. Deputy Mayor Campbell, we'll entertain questions to start, and I do see we have some questions. Councillor Croson.
Thank you, Mayor Higgin. Just one question. I know we meet next week as council. If this gets approved, it's going to be in front of council very quickly. But this SBC does have the ability to approve up to $75,000. Is there a hurry on this? Like I said, literally it's just Thursday to Tuesday. Or is it just goes to council, nobody really cares if there's a 4-day delay? I mean, 4 days is not anything, but I just want to remind us that we do have approval ability at this committee.
Thank you for the question and consideration, but no, I don't think 4 days will make a difference with this one. We can manage with the regular timeline.
Because sometimes you guys are in such a hurry on things, I just want to be sure.
Yeah, not this time.
Okay, thank you. Only question. Thank you, Mayor Higgin.
Thank you, and no more questions. Open up to debate. Councillor Campbell.
Just the request is to be funded through the Provincial Family and Community Support Services funding portfolio. No City of Lethbridge tax funding is being solicited to meet the allocation request, and the allocation request is for the Big Brothers Big Sisters Lethbridge and District Youth Mentorship Program, and will come from the FCS 2024 funding stream. It's a good win. It's a win-win situation here. So if there's no other questions, or you want more debate?
Debate, I just want to offer my support as well. This organization has done some incredible work in the community, and I'm looking at $15,000, and the amount of work that they do in their fundraising is absolutely amazing, and I wish more organizations would follow suit to the way that they do go out and do their fundraising. So I want to thank you for all of the work that you've done with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and so with that, I see no further debate.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. And I'll move on to a resolution from Councillor Palladino, tax cancellation request under compassionate grounds. And this is, be it resolved that this Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council approve the tax cancellation request of 2023 penalties in the amount of $373.21 for the property located at 1212 4th Avenue South, roll number 1204-012-120001. Pursuant to Section 347 of the Municipal Government Act, RSA 2000, Chapter M26 of the MGA, and further be resolved, the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed session discussions and documents with regards to the tax cancellation request under compassionate grounds remain confidential pursuant to Section 17, harmful to personal privacy of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. I will open it up for questions. I see there's none, so with that, move on to debate. Open and close?
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? That passes. Thank you. And from Vice Chair Schmidt-Rempel, amending lease agreement 7.3, be it resolved the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council direct administration to proceed with the confidential direction, and further be resolved the Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed session discussions and documents with regards to the amendment lease agreement remain confidential pursuant to Section 23, Local Public Body Confidences, and 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. I do not see any questions, Vice Chair, so to open debate.
I'll call for the vote.
Open and close. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Oh, we do. We are.
That was amalgamated into 5-2. Yeah.
Thank you.